What if I told you the US just wiped out Iran's leadership, and now they're negotiating a deal with whoever is left? Here's what's happening right now. According to statements from Donald Trump, he claims the US has eliminated multiple layers of Iran's leadership and says this has already created what he calls a regime change. But at the same time, he's also saying negotiations are actively happening. Trump claims Iran is now willing to make a deal, and even suggested they've already agreed to one key demand: not developing a nuclear weapon. Let's move to what Donald Trump had to say.
Look, yeah, we had, I hate to say this in front of these young people. They're not children. I spoke to most of them. They sound like adults to me, even though they are sort of children, right? They'll always be your children. But I hate to say it, but we killed all their leadership. And then they met to choose new leaders, and we killed all of them. And then we killed all their leadership. And then they met to choose new leaders, and we killed all of them. And now we have a new group, and we can easily do that, but let's see how they turn out. We have really regime change. You know, this is a change in the regime because the leaders are all very different than the ones that we started off with that created all those problems. So this was, I think we can say, Jason, this is regime change, right?
What makes you trust them?
I don't trust anybody. I don't trust you. I mean, that's only because I know you. But if I didn't know you, I'd probably have more trust. But I don't trust anyone.
Why bother?
Why do you say that? Why do you say what makes you trust? Do you think I trust them? I don't trust them.
Then why bother talking to them?
Because they're going to make a deal. They're going to make a deal. They did something yesterday that was amazing, actually. They gave us a present, and the present arrived today. And it was a very big present worth a tremendous amount of money. And I'm not going to tell you what that present is, but it was a very significant prize. And they gave it to us, and they said they were going to give it. So that meant one thing to me: we're dealing with the right people.
Are you going to send Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff to do direct negotiations with the Iranians?
Yeah, well, we're in negotiations, as it turned out, and now you've seen what I said yesterday was exactly correct. We're in negotiations right now. They're doing it along with Marco, JD. We have a number of people doing it. And the other side, I can tell you, they'd like to make a deal. And who wouldn't if you were there? Look, their Navy's gone, their Air Force is gone, their communications are gone. That's the biggest problem. It's very hard to communicate them between themselves. All of the anti-aircraft is gone. Most of their missiles are gone. We either shot them or they shot them and don't have them anymore. They're down to a trickle. They're pretty much everything they have is gone. I don't know. Can you name one thing that's not gone, or can you name one thing that's doing well? You know, if you read the papers, you think we're tied. You think we're in a tough battle. We are roaming free over Tehran, the city, Tehran, as opposed to Iran. We're roaming free. We can do whatever we want. And as you know, today we were going to have the privilege of shooting down a very big electric generation plant, one of the biggest in the world. And one shot to the right location ends the plant. It collapses. And we held off based on the fact that we're negotiating. Yeah.
What do you think was the turning point to make you want to pursue a ceasefire? A few days ago, you said you wanted to continue bombing Iran. Now you want to pursue peace talks. Was there something that happened?
The fact that they're talking to us and they're talking sense. And remember, it all starts with they cannot have a nuclear weapon. Just, I said yesterday, they said, what are the top 10? I said, well, number 1, 2, and 3 is they can't have a nuclear weapon. And they're not going to have a nuclear weapon. And we're talking about that. And I don't want to say in advance, but They've agreed they will never have a nuclear weapon. They've agreed to that.
How do you ensure
According to Donald Trump, the United States is currently in active negotiations with Iran involving multiple officials, and he believes Iran wants to make a deal. He claims the US has significantly weakened Iran's military, saying their navy, air force, missile systems and communications are mostly gone, and that the US can now operate freely over Tehran. Trump also said the US was prepared to strike a major power plant in Iran, but chose to hold off because negotiations are underway. He made it clear that the main objective is preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons and claimed that Iran has already agreed to that condition. He also described the situation as a form of regime change, saying much of Iran's leadership has been eliminated and replaced. And finally, he mentioned that Iran gave the US what he called a very big present related to oil and gas, though he did not explain what it was. On one side, Trump is saying Iran is heavily weakened and the US has full control, but at the same time, negotiations are happening. So the question is, why negotiate if the advantage is already that strong? He also claims Iran has agreed to give up nuclear weapons, but there's no clear confirmation of that yet. So that raises another question. Is that verified, or is it still part of ongoing talks? Then there's the idea of regime change. Is this truly a long-term shift in power, or just temporary instability during conflict? And maybe the biggest question, what exactly is this very big present tied to oil and the Strait of Hormuz? Because without details, it leaves a major gap in the story. So right now, we're seeing strong claims, ongoing negotiations, and missing information all at the same time. And things could change quickly. Would you trust this situation? I'm curious to see your thoughts. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. Now adding to this here on the newsfeed, we're getting more insight from analysts and correspondents, and it's adding a whole new layer to what's really happening behind the scenes. According to White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett, President Donald Trump is signaling that the US could be close to a deal with Iran. She reports that Trump believes Iran has already agreed to the main condition, never developing a nuclear weapon, and says negotiations are still ongoing. But at the same time, there are clear contradictions. Trump is saying the war has essentially been won, while also admitting he's not completely sure how it will end. He's also continuing to claim that regime change has already happened, arguing that multiple levels of Iran's leadership have been eliminated and replaced. Now let's talk about one of the most confusing parts of this entire situation, the so-called mystery gift. According to Halkett, even the White House has not clarified what this is. Trump says it's tied to oil and gas, but refuses to give details. There is some speculation that it could be related to oil sales after sanctions were lifted, but again, nothing has been confirmed, and then we get a very different perspective from inside Iran. Reporting from Tehran, correspondent Ali Hashem says Iranian officials are still publicly denying that any negotiations are taking place at all. However, behind the scenes, there are reports that an offer may actually exist, and that Iran's national security leadership is reviewing it. There's even discussion that talks could happen through a third party, possibly in Pakistan. So now we're seeing two completely different narratives unfold at the same time. On one side, the US says negotiations are real and progress is being made. On the other side, Iran denies everything publicly, but may still be considering something privately. And that's where the biggest questions come in. Would Iran actually give up its missile program? Would it step away from its regional allies? And who would ultimately control something as critical as the Strait of Hormuz? Because those are major decisions, and they're not going to be resolved quickly. So, while this may look like progress toward a deal, there are still major gaps, contradictions, and unanswered questions. And right now, that's what makes this situation so unpredictable.
We know that the Treasury Department lifted sanctions on Iranian oil on Friday, and so
Now here's how this war is impacting oil, gas, and the global economy. The biggest issue right now is the Strait of Hormuz, a key route where about 20% of the world's oil supply passes through. With rising tensions in that region, any disruption instantly affects global energy markets. We're already seeing the impact. Gas prices have surged, in some cases more than $1 per gallon in just weeks, as supply fears drive prices higher. At the same time, energy infrastructure across the region has been damaged, which is expected to reduce oil and gas output over the long term. That puts even more pressure on supply. And this isn't just about fuel, it's hitting the broader economy. Airlines are cutting flights due to rising fuel costs, countries are scrambling to secure energy supplies, and industries that depend on oil are starting to slow down. Some nations are even turning back to coal just to keep electricity running. So what started as a regional conflict is now becoming a global economic issue, affecting prices, travel, and energy stability around the world. And if the situation escalates further, the economic impact could get even worse. According to recent reports, Cuba is facing severe fuel shortages, leading to nationwide blackouts, a collapsing power grid, and major disruptions to daily life. To understand how serious this is, millions of people have been left without electricity at times, with outages spreading across large parts of the country. The root of the problem is an ongoing oil shortage, largely tied to US pressure and restrictions that have cut off key fuel supplies from countries like Venezuela and Mexico. As a result, Cuba is now struggling to power homes, hospitals, transportation, and even basic services like water systems and food production. And on the ground, the situation is getting worse. Aid groups and volunteers have started sending supplies into the country, bringing food, medical equipment, and even solar panels to help people cope with the ongoing blackouts. But this has also sparked political tension. Some critics, including Cuban exiles and activists, are warning that humanitarian aid could be controlled or misused by the government, while others argue the crisis is being made worse by the Cuban leadership's refusal to make changes. At the same time, US President Donald Trump has increased pressure on Cuba, even making controversial remarks about possibly taking control of the island, adding another layer of uncertainty to the situation. So, right now, Cuba is caught in the middle of an energy collapse, economic strain, and political tension. And for many people on the island, it's turning into a daily struggle just to get by. And if fuel supplies don't improve soon, this crisis could deepen even further. In the Philippines, officials are warning that the ongoing oil disruption is starting to affect aviation directly. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. says the situation is worsening fast, with fuel supply issues linked directly to the conflict in the Middle East. And here's the key concern: jet fuel shortages. Airlines are now being forced into extreme measures. Some are carrying enough fuel for both departure and return trips because certain countries are refusing to refuel Philippine aircraft. That's not just expensive, it's unsustainable, and the effects are already showing. Budget airline Cebu Air has announced plans to cut flights, while other carriers across Asia, including Vietnam Airlines and Vietjet, are reducing routes and frequency. What started as a regional issue is now turning into a chain reaction across the aviation industry. Behind all of this is a deeper energy problem. The Philippines relies heavily on oil imports from the Middle East, and now it's scrambling for alternatives. Officials are even considering increasing coal usage just to keep electricity stable as fuel prices continue to rise. But there's also confusion. While the president is warning about possible flight groundings, some energy officials are saying there's still enough fuel for now. So we're seeing two sides of the same story again: warnings of crisis and uncertainty about how close it really is. But one thing is clear: if this situation continues, it won't just affect flights. It could begin to impact entire economies across Asia. And that shows how far-reaching this conflict has become. from fuel shortages in Cuba to grounded planes in the Philippines. This is no longer just a regional war. This is a global energy crisis in motion. According to recent reports, India has managed to avoid major disruptions in oil and gas supply, even as the rest of the world faces shortages, rising prices, and growing uncertainty. And when you compare it globally, the contrast is clear. In China, factories are already cutting production due to fuel shortages. In the United States, officials are relying on emergency reserves. In the United Kingdom, fuel and gas prices are rising sharply. And in Germany, coal plants are being restarted just to keep energy flowing. But India, at least for now, has avoided those extremes. Officials say the country has built up over 70 days of energy reserves, diversified its supply sources, and expanded imports to prevent disruptions. They've also increased the use of pipeline natural gas to reduce dependence on global LNG markets. But here's the important part. This doesn't mean India is unaffected. In fact, India is heavily dependent on imports, with around 90% of some energy supplies passing through the Strait of Hormuz, the same region at the center of this conflict. So, if that route is disrupted, the impact could be immediate. Officials have already warned that this is a global crisis, and India is actively working through diplomacy and alternative strategies to avoid shortages. There have even been moments of panic among the public, driven by fears of supply disruptions, but so far, those concerns have not turned into widespread shortages. So, while countries like Cuba are facing blackouts, and the Philippines is dealing with aviation fuel risks, India, for now, is managing to stay stable. But the bigger question is, how long can that last? Now I'm curious to know what your thoughts are. We're being told India is stable, with strong reserves and no major disruptions, while the rest of the world is struggling with rising prices and shortages. But does that actually add up? If so much of India's energy still depends on the Strait of Hormuz, the same region at the center of this conflict, how is it not being hit the same way? So what do you think? Is this real stability or just a delay before things catch up? And more importantly, do you think this crisis is just getting started? Or are we already seeing the worst of it? Because something here feels like it's still unfolding and we're not seeing the full picture yet. Leave some comments. What do you think we should do? What do you think Iran's plan is? How long can this continue? And most importantly, can we financially continue to fund this war with our current economic debt that just keeps rising? Be sure to subscribe as the situation is still evolving. Stay tuned for what's to come. Thanks for watching.